Well, let's get straight into it because I think, there's a lot of business going on. Arsenal, obviously, just about got that one over the line by the look of it with Declan Rice. I mean, I know Charlie's been looking forward to this actually happening. He's been talking about it for about 2 years. And Yerry and Timber. Just explain, because when Nick was first on the show with Dharmesh a couple of weeks ago, he'd never heard of Yerry and Timber. What's he like? Where's he going to play? We saw him at the World Cup with Holland last year, didn't we?
Yeah, and he was a player that Manchester United were really interested in getting last summer. And they've got to give some credit to Sam Dean from Telegraph, another great Arsenal writer who sort of flagged that when Arsenal were first into him. I think a lot of people thought he's going to be a centre-back in this Arsenal system, but the plan looks like it's going to be that he can play as a right-back, but he'll do similar to what Zinchenko does on the left, and tuck in. And I think everyone saw last season when Zinchenko was out, that Arsenal team fell down because they didn't have a fullback who could tuck in. And now the idea will be that if there's no Zinchenko, then the right back can tuck in. And we saw them try it a bit at the end of the season. Thomas Partey played a few games and tucked in. And I think now what they've done is they basically found a solution to when Zinchenko is not in the team on the other side of the pitch. So he's a versatile player, similar to Havertz, Rice, but I think predominantly we'll see him in that right back slot for Arsenal.
Okay,
and they've got a song for him, haven't they? Haven't they already? Every time he goes down, Timber! Oh, don't bang the desk. Sorry, Jimin. That's an official warning for the banging of the desk story.
We have a lot of this.
No, you're right. I had never heard of Timber before. I've sort of vaguely heard of him, but now, of course, I realise he's obviously a very good signing, astute signing, and he's going to replace Tomiyasu or Ben White? Where's he?
Well, I think
does he start?
Well, the other issue would be is that when Saliba was out injured, the options at centre back. I mean, how much would have Arsenal fans wanted Ben White to tuck in, and you could have brought someone at right back, and now they'll be able to do that. Tomiyasu, for me, he's someone you keep in your squad because he can literally play anywhere across the back four. What it does throw up is, do you keep someone like Rob Holding with a year on his contract? Do you look to move him on? Cedric Suarez, someone else, a year on a contract. So I think it gives Arsenal options and versatility. And in the title race, when they got to the crunch point, I think they lacked being able to change things and having the depth that Man City ultimately had.
Do you think Timber is the last man in? Looks like Havertz is done. Rice, we are hearing today that deal's just about sealed with 105 million with the add-ons and Timber. But are there any more Arsenal players coming? Any more people coming? I think
they'll still be open to doing business. I think this is the predominant large chunk of their business. I think now it'll be a case of getting people out the door before they get other ones in. And Thomas Partey is the main one, as we mentioned. I think they would consider an offer for him if it's the right offer. And then you get players in, but these three players look like it's the core of their budget. And when you're spending 200 million, you'd expect it to be that.
But I've seen a report. I don't know if it was in your paper, the Standard, about Lavia coming in from Southampton, 50 million quid.
Yeah, I think I've not heard anything concrete from Arsenal going in from. I think he's a player that is being certainly looked at by all the big clubs. I haven't seen anyone, pull the trigger on him. I think Arsenal, he's a player that they obviously like, but I haven't heard anything concrete that they are fully going for him. And I think first, when you look at the finances, they'll probably want to get some players out the door before they do anything else.
So Tierney's one, isn't we expect might go?
Yeah, Tierney's one who could go. Xhaka looks like Bayer Leverkusen for sort of over 20 million, which again, year on contract, good piece of business. Balogun, another player, great season on loan. I think Arsenal are trying to say to clubs they want £50 million. I think they'd do well to get 50 million, but in the market, they will argue, a young player, had a good season in France. What's the going rate for a player like that? They would argue that...
Scored a lot of goals, didn't he?
Exactly. They would argue that's what a player like that should attract. And I think Arsenal, in this Edu era, they've bought well, certainly in the last 2 seasons, but they've not sold well. If you look at Bern Leno a year ago, £8 million. I think they will argue that over the next summer window, January, years to come, that Edu needs to improve selling if he's really going to stamp his legacy at this club. That's one area where I think he hasn't quite nailed it yet.
Yeah, I would argue, not against that, but one of the reasons is that they've been very keen to trim down the size of the squad, and we've seen it at Chelsea and other clubs. If you just keep demanding more and more money for players, you can't get rid of them. You end up with these really bloated squads, and I think the board at Arsenal have said, well, look, if it costs us an extra 5-10 million to get rid of Ozil or Aubameyang, and we can keep the manager happy and trim down the squad, then we'll do it. It's a bit like paying an extra 10-20 million pounds for Rice. We need him in. We need those guys out. We've got the money. Got all this TV money. Got all this ridiculously high season ticket money. Let's use it.
I think as well the issue before is he's been selling players that people haven't necessarily been in demand for. Whereas this summer, if you look at Kieran Tierney, you think, yeah, that's a good player people want.
Plenty of
Granit Xhaka, Balogun. So this summer he's going to be selling players that should command fees. So I think he will argue before, look, I didn't have the players to sell to generate good fees. I did what I could. Whereas this summer, I think there's justifiably to say, look, you've got good players here, we should be getting good fees.
Xhaka is an interesting one because obviously he was completely out of favour with the club and the fans, and we'll come on to this in a minute about the disconnect perhaps between the fans online and the fans in the stadium. But that day he walked off, the fans in the stadium made it clear they weren't happy with him, and yet he turned it completely around. You did the first interview back, I think, didn't you?
Yeah.
Is it now strange that he wants to go again, but under completely different circumstances?
Yeah, it's an interesting one for Xhaka, and he's someone I had the chance to speak to quite a lot covering Arsenal, partly because he was always a player who would front up after the game. Win, lose or draw, he would be quite front foot. And also I think, when he was trying to rebuild his connection with the fans, I think he understood the role of the media, and people around him understood the role of the media, that he needs to tell his side of the story. He needs to explain, why everything happened, what led to it. And he was very open about the abuse he received on social media. He spoke openly about it, and I think his work has actually changed a lot of how footballers are received. And yeah, for me, the benefit and the nice thing is to see him leave on a big high.
Yeah.
I don't think he would have been pushing to leave, but I think it got to the point where him and the club had sat down. He's got a year on his contract. There's no new offer of a contract coming on the table. There's a chance for him to go and play for Bayer Leverkusen under Xabi Alonso, a long contract. It's not a key factor for him, but he will be closer to his wife's family. He's going to play a leading role back in the Bundesliga where he's enjoyed before. So it was one where I think it made sense for all parties. I don't think it was a case of Xhaka being like, I want to get out of this club. I think it was one where it has run its course, and he's gone from an incredible redemption arc where 3 years ago, who would have seen him going out like this? And now he leaves with his head held high, and Arsenal get a good fee.
Now, we did a piece on the Haters website, HaytersTV website, about players that fans had sort of forgotten were still at their clubs. And the name that came up first and foremost was Nicolas Pepe. Now, he's back. He's due back in training, isn't he? I think he's got a bit of an injury. He hasn't even got a squad number anymore. Until the Rice deal, he was the club record signing. What's going to happen there?
Yeah, I mean, Pepe is going to be someone they're going to need to try and find a buyer for him. It's been a deal that just hasn't worked out, has it? And that was one that was, when at the time, I think a lot of people were excited because I can remember doing the mix zone after he'd signed, and we spoke to Aubameyang, and it was the excitement he was saying of him, Lacazette and Pepe, this front three, over £250 million, I think, for all of them together. And it never really worked.
He had flashes, didn't he? A couple of times, yeah.
Just, I don't think he really settled in the team, and he's not really, for me, an Arteta type player. In fact, it doesn't really suit the way they want to play.
And you got Saka there.
And I just think my concern is, are you going to find a buyer for him in this market when he'll be on good wages given his fee?
What's he got left in his contract?
He's got 1 year left on his contract. So
with his wages and that fee, they're going to have to take a hit on that to get him out the door, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, I think for Nice, when he was on loan there, I think he basically, Arsenal sort of subsidised some of his wages, get him out on loan. If you can find someone to take him, brilliant. I mean, a lot of people are certainly on social media. If you see anything on Pepe, everyone's saying, surely there must be, it's a club in Saudi Arabia, they'll come get him a move there, which seems to be where Premier League clubs, when they want to get rid of players, that seems to be the go-to market. But I think it's going to be a hard one for him to sell. I mean, as you say, when fans don't sort of really think of him as being part of the club, what a buyer's going to think,
So could it be he goes on loan again? Do you think Arsenal will end up, and other clubs indeed in London and around the country, will end up loaning a lot of their players rather than selling them this summer?
Yeah, I mean, I think before this summer when it was coming into it for Chelsea, I looked at the situation and saw parallels with Arsenal where you had a bloated squad, some ageing players, some players that the manager wouldn't want, and I was thinking, how are they going to get rid of these players? They're going to have to, Arsenal were ruthless and terminated, and they've paid off for it now because they've got space in the wage bill to get in big signings. But Chelsea have basically found that Saudi market where they can get players out the door.
Yeah, because they used to sell them to Arsenal, didn't they?
Yeah, they did. And Chelsea found that Saudi market to sort of get rid of their players, and I think a lot of clubs will try and use that if they can get them there. But these are the players that Chelsea sold. They're still players with big names and prestige. I think where your struggle is if you're sort of a middle Premier League team, which pay good wages, and finding someone outside of England to pay what you did is going to be really hard because the market outside of the Premier League, if you speak to people, there's not the money.
Nothing like
There's
it,
not the money in there. People aren't paying big fees.
Talking of Oba, is he going to Saudi? Is that something that you've heard? Because it's amazing how his career's gone from Arsenal to Barcelona to Chelsea. He seems to be just shoved around pretty unwanted.
Yeah, I mean, I think my colleague Nizar, you obviously had on here, I think he certainly said he had offers from Saudi to go there. I think his wish would have been to go back to Barcelona, where he had obviously went from Arsenal and had a good stint there, didn't he? And then came back to Chelsea. And
he took on the fated number 9 shirt, Chelsea, which is a bad mistake for him.
And also for him, though, he came when Tuchel was the manager, and
10 days later he wasn't.
And Tuchel had gone, and Tuchel was someone who worked with Aubameyang, and I remember all the time during the Arteta reign, exactly when we were speaking about discipline problems, and Tuchel would get asked about it because he worked with him, and he would always defend Aubameyang. He'd say we'd sort of work round him and defend his character. And you thought when Aubameyang went there, okay, maybe this will work. Old manager, knows a player, and then 10 days later he's out the door. So Aubameyang is another one where I think Chelsea will be quite happy just to try and get his wages off his books.